think that on one hand, there is illegal there are illegal things happening within the sex industry,
Right.
trafficking, things that we've talked about on Pornhub,
Right.
videos non-consensual, all of that. So that's an area where I hope that, all of us can find agreement. On the side of things, as you bring up, that are technically considered legal, then I think on that side of things, there's just a lot for us to wrestle with. And I think there are areas where we'll find agreement and areas where we may disagree. But I don't, like I said, I don't think it's just something to say, well, this is legal. So then, we don't have to worry about it. It's, uh, so for me personally, I grew up, as the youngest of four children. I was very sheltered in a way in my like young childhood. We didn't have, not to age myself here, but we didn't have like social media and phone, all that stuff that kids have access to now today. I was out hunting for snakes and riding motorcycles and surfing and like doing stuff that kids do in Southern California. Um, but when I was 11 years old, I watched a movie called The Accused, and this is a movie where Jodie Foster plays this woman named Cheryl Arroyo, and it's the real story. It's the true story of her gang rape in this bar, and then her ensuing fight for justice. And I don't know what kept me so sheltered necessarily as a young child, aside from just being a different time. And I don't know how I stumbled on that movie at 11 years old, but it definitely marked my life. And it really, I think it like broke part of me. Um, just the awareness that humans could treat each other this way. And I thought at that time, rape has to be the worst thing that could ever happen to a person. So I, my, I was basically raised by my two older sisters, my mom and my grandmother. So I had a lot of influence from women in my
Hmm.
life. And I think as a result of that, developed a unique identification with the experience of women from a young age that was very normal to me. And the experience of both of those things culminated when I discovered the issue of sex trafficking and realized that, yeah, rape, this thing that really had a devastating impact on me as a kid, just seeing that happen in this movie was happening around the world at a large scale. And I think that when I discovered sex trafficking, that the part of me that was impacted as a child came fully up. And I was just completely wrecked by that. And um, yeah, it's very emotional for me because it's very personal. Like we work with people whose lives have been destroyed by this, and it's hard to separate myself from that and just put it as like a issue or a statistic. Um, so that really set me on a journey of focusing my life on this. And there was a long period of time where it was hard to go to bed at night without imagining women and girls out there who were in these situations. And so that definitely created this kind of like desperation to make a difference in this space. And that drove me into addressing the issue of sex trafficking. For 4 years, I traveled the world documenting it everywhere that it was happening in the creation of a documentary called Nefarious Merchant of Souls. It was my first documentary. And through that began to see some overlapping realities tied to the porn industry. And so in 2012, I kind of went back to the drawing board to look at this issue of pornography. And decided to dig into it a bit deeper, again, just thinking of the sex trafficking component, but then looking at the pornography from the standpoint of its impact on consumers in our world, as well as the creation of it, the human rights side of it. So the public health and the human rights side of it, the way in which pornography was being created. I and so that is initially what sent me into researching and investigating pornography. There's such an extreme reaction to any criticism of pornography that it's almost like, hey, just leave us entirely alone to do our own thing, or you are the devil, you know? And for me, it's like, what other industry do we allow that? Like, what other multi-billion-dollar industry goes completely self-regulated without any outside criticism? So when I began to investigate the porn industry, realized the degree to which elements of trafficking and exploitation and predatory behavior were just utterly rampant. I'm not talking about illegal rape porn, child porn. I'm talking about the mainstream porn industry was rife with coercion, trafficking, exploitation, violence. And I talked with scores of producers, directors, performers. I couldn't even believe some of the things that they shared with me and some of the things that I personally observed. And so it was really through that journey that I've come into this space, not like from a perspective of shame on you, you are the impure, porn people, this like holier than thou, judgmental, yada, yada. No, I came into this as somebody with a broken heart that I've never recovered from, that I can barely ever talk about this issue without getting very emotional, because it's a really real and difficult subject, to figure out like what's going on, and discovered that there was all this exploitation happening. So if you don't want the criticism, then clean up your act. But if you're going to allow people like Max Hardcore to be voted into the Hall of Fame as representative and emblematic of your entire industry, you're begging for people to come and bring criticism. And it needs it. It needs it. One pornographer told me this. He said, this is how I do it. He explained it to me. He said, I tell these young women that they're going to make X number of dollars doing X, vanilla sex act. He said, and I do that very intentionally to, one, get them to spend that money in their head before they ever get to set, so they can't get out of whatever it is I'm going to ask them to do. And two, to get them to set. He said, then in the middle of the scene, I flip the script. And now you need to do this, this, and this in order to get paid. And he said, by virtue of the pressure on set, the fact that she spent the money in her head, and all the underlying dynamics that go with that, of just, which maybe we could break down later, but he's like, of course she's going to do it. He said, and then he said to me at that point, how is that not trafficking? I couldn't even believe that he said that. This was coming straight from the horse's mouth. This was literally coming from a producer telling me that his entire model of recording pornography is based on a system of coercion that he acknowledges as trafficking. And yet is sold to the public as, she wanted this, she loves this, she deserves this. So I talked to a lot of these performers who have a Twitter page or a social media presence or whatever, that have this appearance of, I love this, I like this, I enjoy this, but behind the scenes were totally broken. And, just completely open about the exploitation that they had endured, the abuse that they had endured. And so what began to happen for me is that I began to see past the two-dimensional presentation of women in pornography to the three-dimensional human who actually has real life experiences, preferences, histories, and is somebody worthy of compassion, not just being viewed as this sex object. So that compassionate lens has really changed the way that I interact with this whole reality of pornography. And I tried to come at it from a compassionate lens, but also with objective thinking and a critical thinking lens to engage, in really substantive discussions about areas where this kind of exploitation needs to be addressed and eradicated for the safety of everyone, for the safety of people who are being featured in it and the safety of people who are viewing it. And so anyhow, I wanted just to give that bigger frameworks because, as soon as people slap a religious label on you, there's all kinds of assumptions that come with that. But, and they don't belong to me. Like what I see in the life of Jesus is somebody who not only came through literally the lineage of a prostituted woman. The blood of prostituted women is literally flowing in his body, but showed enormous compassion in his day for people who are in sexually, promiscuous positions. So I like, for me, it's not like, ooh, gross. It's like, I'm very aware of my own brokenness. I'm aware of the brokenness of our planet. I have a compassionate lens to address it. I'm not coming at this from a heavy-handed, top-down, hyper-religious, shame-based way, and I think that's important to just say for the purpose of conversation, because when shame becomes a part of the conversation, it's hard. It's hard. I don't like feeling shamed. I don't want anybody else to feel shamed. So, but I think these issues are really, really, really important, and that's where I kind of hold the line.